The video game boss has been a staple since at least the days of the NES. An enemy saved for the end of a level or the game itself is what a boss character is. Bowser, Mike Tyson, the fucking snowman from Earthworm Jim. These are some of the titans that come to mind when we talk about video game bosses. But why do video games have bosses? Where did the idea for a video game boss come from? These are all relevant questions when having this discussion, but the question I aim to answer today is, what would it be like to take on the very first video game boss? Welcome class to VG 101. I'm your host, the VG Professor. Now, one thing that we have to get out of the way right off the bat is that other players in something such as Pong or maybe Space War, those aren't bosses. A boss is something that is programmed within the game itself, an antagonist for the player to overcome, usually saved for the end of a level or maybe the end of the game entirely. Now, what other forms of media have antagonists? Well, just about every form of media now that I think about it, but what I want to talk about are books, and more specifically, fantasy novels. Fantasy novel antagonists consisted of many types. You got the man versus nature, man versus God, but most relevant to this video is man versus man. Saruman and Sauron were excellent antagonists for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but they were not the only enemies. Many chapters had individual challenges to overcome, such as the Balrog and Shelob. If we consider chapters levels, you can start to see the parallels between antagonists in these novels to video game bosses. So besides that, why am I talking about fantasy novels? Didn't I just say that other forms of media do this as well? Well, I'm bringing up fantasy novels for the direct influence in creating the king of tabletop games, Dungeons & Dragons. While the comparisons to the works of Tolkien are the most obvious, other fantasy authors played a role as well in influencing Gary Gygax to create Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. However, I don't give a shit about that, because even though I've spent all this time talking about what's influenced Dungeons & Dragons, what really matters is what did Dungeons & Dragons influence? When it was released, it captured the imagination of fantasy fans everywhere. Some of those fans would even go on to put their own spin on the game. Most notable to this topic are programmers, and even more specific, I'm talking about programmers that used PLATO. PLATO, or Programmed Logic for Automatic Teaching Operations, was a computer-assisted instruction system that was developed by the University of Illinois in 1960. For about 4 decades, it helped students learn a variety of different topics as well as programming their own lessons. Some of these programs ended up being long-lasting video games. It also expanded to other schools and was able to be accessed through terminals, much like the situation with MECC and the Oregon Trail. Going back to Dungeons & Dragons, some of the people inspired by the game were Gary Weisenhunt and Ray Wood, who, at Southern Illinois University, wrote the PLATO program, D&D, in 1975. Also referred to as the Game of Dungeons, D&D was one of the very first computer RPGs, and it is the first game in history to feature a boss enemy, the dragon. Much like the terminal systems of the last century, you can play D&D through the PTerm terminal app if you sign up on cyber1.org. There's a link in this video's description. The game has you enter the Weisenwood dungeon, where your character has to dive deeper and deeper into the lower levels of the dungeon to find and kill the dragon and retrieve the orb. The orb is a mystical item that is said to make whoever can exit the dungeon with it so powerful that they have no choice but to retire from adventuring, because there is simply no point in doing anything else. On top of having a final boss and an end game in mind, the game is also really hard. In fact, the best thing to do is to be on the side of caution, because death is permanent. That's right, if you die at any point in this game, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. You could lose several hours of progress for the slightest slip up, and to someone who's never played, it's pretty hard to figure out. Each level is essentially a maze filled with enemies that can kill you pretty easily until you get enough XP. This may be the first game in existence where you have to endlessly grind in order to proceed at all. I sure hope that doesn't become a trend in video games. Basically, here's the rundown how to get through this game. Number 1, understand your stats. You have 4 stats that can be anything between 3 and 18. Not considering the influence of items, once your stats are rolled, that's what your stats are. You can re-roll, but only at the beginning, so roll a good character before you start. Strength equals how good you are at fighting monsters and directly impacts how much gold you can carry. Intelligence affects how well magic spells work, wisdom affects how well cleric spells work, and dexterity affects how well you can evade monsters if you need to run away. The higher your overall level is, the better off you are stats-wise in relation to monsters that are on or below your level. You need 10,000 XP for each level. Number 2, know where you are at all times. If you have to start making a physical map on a grid to understand the layout of the levels, do it. and there are 20 levels of the dungeon overall. Getting lost is the worst possible thing to happen. You can end up trapped or even falling into a pit taking you lower into the dungeon when you're trying to get out. So map, because the game does not provide one for you. Number 3, know when to get out. You can get XP and gold while you're in the dungeon, but the only way it applies to your character's stats is when you escape. The only exit to the dungeon is on the first floor, so if you're stuck on level 17 with no spells, you're shit out of luck. You need to escape with gold to increase the amount of hit points your character has, as well as how many magic and cleric spells you have. Number 4, know how to fight. And by fight, I mean only use your spells or run away. If you straight up fight something, especially anything that is on your level or higher, it is guaranteed you will lose some hit points, and ultimately die if you fight anything too strong. Your best bet is to always use spells. At maximum you have 25 magic and 25 cleric spells to use. This is what I think the best spells are on each enemy based on my experiences. For magic, use Flaming Arrow on deaths or men, use Eye of Newt on demons, glass, or specters, use Kitchen Sink on wizards or ghouls. Yeah, that's right, throw a whole kitchen sink at those fucking ghouls. For cleric spells, use Light Candle on wizards, Holy Water on deaths, Exorcise on demons and men, and Pray for glass, ghouls, and specters. Fireball and Lightning are actually the most powerful spells, but they can do damage to you as well. Dispel and that spell will either kill the monster or do nothing, so just forget it. Everything else will at least do some damage. Sleep only works on enemies level 4 or under, and I've never had Hold work once, so just forget all of these other spells. Number 5. Everything in this game wants to kill you. Know what items are okay. Chests contain a lot of gold but can be dangerous. You can visually examine them, but a lot of times it tells you nothing. A chest can have a gem of brightness that blinds you for a random amount of turns, or you can clumsily open a chest. I guess you fall opening it, or the chest smashes your fingers or something, and it can take out nearly half your health or kill you. Potions can be visually or clerically examined, costing you 1 cleric spell, and sometimes it doesn't tell you anything. A potion can let you become invisible, levitate over pits, give you XP, help you find more treasure, heal you, possibly give you an extra permanent skill point in strength, but it can also be poison. You can find magic items that will help you as well, such as armor, helmets, shields, and swords that all give you combat buffs, rings that can regenerate health, increase your speed for evasions, invisibility, levitation, and luck in finding more magic items, a bag of holding that increases how much gold you can carry by 100,000, elven boots that make it so that you can encounter less enemies, a lantern that lets you see secret walls, and an amulet that tells you how well you will fare against an enemy. For my money, the amulet is the most helpful item in the game. You can also visually and clerically examine these as well because they may be booby-trapped and kill you. Last but not least, books. Use the capital B key to turn these off because they are absolutely worthless. More often than not, they will have explosive runes that, you guessed it, kill you. If they don't have explosives, you can read them, but only if you have enough intelligence to understand them. If you can read them, they can give you XP or even raise one of your skill points, but they are just as likely to subtract from your XP or lower your skill points. In conclusion, fuck books. You don't need them. As you go deeper into the dungeon, all these things that can hurt you do more damage incrementally. Last tip, know how to grind. The lower levels of the dungeon have more gold, and the more gold you are carrying, the stronger the monsters that attack you will be. The stronger the monsters you kill, the more XP you gain. The more XP you gain, the more levels you grind. Just do what works for you until you feel like you're ready to take on the dragon. Speaking of which, I think it's time we took him out. No. The dragon killed me? I have to start all over with a brand new character? Well, I guess there's nothing left to do but grind. Again. Okay, this time instead of trying to fight the dragon, I'll just use the dragon spell. At last, the orb, it's finally mine! Does that enemy say level 3000? Maybe I can take him? You've gotta be fucking kidding me! Now I have to do all that all over again, That's it. This time I'm not fucking around. This time I'm gonna grind until there is nothing in this dungeon that can kill me. I want to save my spells instead of having them drain from the dragon spell, so let's see how this son of a bitch likes lightning. Yeah, he's dead! Now let's get out of here. I did it! I killed the dragon, escaped the Wizenwood dungeon with the orb, and now I can finally retire to the Elysian Fields. Whew, man. Now that was satisfying. I have to say, the satisfaction of beating the game as a whole massively overshadows the satisfaction of beating the dragon. The game itself is an unrelenting gauntlet that makes you die over and over and over again just to get the slightest bit further each time you actually play it. The permadeath makes you stay on edge the entire time and makes every fight feel like it's life or death, which is what you should feel when facing a boss, not a level 1 glass. Maybe that's why the dragon as well as the game has been lost to time. The boss fight is over one way or the other at a max of 2 turns, and after the dragon, you're sworn by buffed up versions of the regular enemies that it feels like the dungeon itself is a boss. Even still, it's my firm belief that PLATO D&D and the dragon deserve the recognition for creating this phenomenon that we know as boss fights, and meets all the criteria we set at the beginning of this video. We may not have gotten classic RPGs such as the Elder Scrolls and Fable had it not been for tabletop Dungeons & Dragons, as well as the fantasy novels that inspired it, but we may also not have gotten Bowser and Ganon had it not been for the dragon. Unfortunately, when I say this game has been lost to time, I mean it. Just take a look at the YouTube searches, Google searches, and even the Wikipedia page on PLATO D&D. There's next to nothing, and I'd wager I'm one of the only people in years who've actually found the game and beaten it. Personally, I believe it's important to bring this game to light, and not necessarily get people to play it, but to have an appreciation for what this game gave us in terms of boss characters. But what do I think of the game as a whole? Should you play it? Should you spend the 70 plus hours dying and grinding over and over again just for the satisfaction of defeating video gaming's very first boss? No. This game kind of sucks dick. 2 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and remember to catch me next time right here on VG 101.